Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Days Gone on PS4. I have covered a lot of zombie based and zombie adjacent media on the show in its time in the world stage. And why not? Zombie media is easy, a common horror staple, and they can be used as an allegory for whatever kind of story one is looking to tell. From political beliefs, not facts, beliefs which require no basis in reality, and ideology, environmental issues, concern over public health and welfare, or whatever sort of us versus them issue we as humans like to spend so much of our time othering one another over. They can even be fun and darkly comedic. Today, I discuss a game that did not get enough love, where similar games of the humans are the real enemy zombie media got too much. Today I'm discussing 2019's Days Gone. But first, I would like to propose a question to you, dear listener. A thought experiment, if you will. If you found yourself one of the survivors of a world where everything from basic services to social order had collapsed due to virus, nuclear war, or anything that might end human society as we know it, would you be you? Would the person you were, or who, or what you identified as prior to collapse, matter? Would you go forward as a new person, or would you continue to fly the flags of the old world? To paraphrase the words of a veteran deathbed hospital chaplain I recently came across, he has seen a lot of final moments over the years. But the one thing he has heard most often from those at the end of their life is they regret they hid who they were. Some were forced to hide, but most were too scared to be and embrace who they really were. My thought on this is, of course, this makes sense. We do not live in societies, whether local, national, regional, or global, where we can be who we truly are. We as a race and a species have spent centuries organizing ourselves around being someone or something other than who we are for the greater good, for satisfying immediate need, or to simply hide from those who wield power and might like the brutal acts of conformity, both figurative and literal, that it is. The whole fucking thing, this whole fragile Fabergé egg of a world of give and take, mostly take, that we built around shoring up power structures for mutual defense or to serve those who claim to be in our betters, might honestly just collapse altogether if we just stopped one day, as a whole, and decided to be ourselves. There would be some who would flourish, most definitely, but I'm sure even more would die in the aftermath of purges and rape and bloody vengeance, as we would find out many more people being who they truly are is not very nice, and our tolerances for people who are not like us, especially not on the surface and not immediately, is far lower than we would be willing to admit in public. But what of those who already live that outsider lifestyle in the here and now? Would they stay the same after the collapse of society? Or would they too change and evolve into something else? Into this thought experiment void steps our main character, the wonderfully and preposterously named Deacon St. John, to offer a possible answer to that question. Deacon St. John was, in the world before, an outlaw biker. Not the kind of motorcyclist you see on weekends or in the suburbs, but the real kind that has a criminal record for dealing drugs and committing murder in bar fights. He still flies the colors of the old world. He and his motorcycle clubmate Boozer, of a club called the Mongrels, out of Farewell, Oregon. Since this game was a product of Bend Studios, based in the state of Oregon itself, the studio got a golden opportunity to portray their home state, and they took full advantage. Days Gone takes place in a mostly rural setting, and is a third-person open-world action game with horror elements. And you are the player will spend a lot of time between missions driving around on your bike, which can be customized with a sort of camp script or cache you get for doing jobs for each of the survivor camps you interact with, looking for gas, looking for scrap, parts, and whatnot to make healing items, improvised explosives, melee weapons, and the like, and trying to avoid infected animals and large hordes of the game's catalyst, the freaks, or freakers. Freakers are not zombies per se. They are instead infected humans who have sort of devolved into a more primal form of humanoid, who are only interested in hunting down food and collecting together in the large hordes of others of their kind. While they travel together in packs and hide out during the daylight hours, or rain and snow, in homes and caves that they have commandeered, in which they have literally shit all over everything and bind it with twigs to form a nest. Wonderful, isn't it? Anyway, much like any open world mission based game, you can tackle the jobs offered by the camps in any order, a lot of which are the same few categories: hunt down a deserter, hunt down someone who got lost, hunt down someone who committed a crime against that particular society, or follow a story mission. The story missions are where the real meat of the game is. But every mission nets Deacon experience, camp cash, and trust. Trust perhaps being the most important of currencies, as with enough of it you can purchase better guns, medical boxes, grenades, ammo, and silencers for your guns. But for this review I will be dealing mostly with the story missions, many of which overlap during the course of the game. So Deacon and Boozer, being survivalists, live out of an old fire watchtower that they have converted into a fort of sorts, and they are eventually planning to leave the area and head north, just generally north, hoping to find I don't know what. They're kind of lazy about it though, generally milling about and making excuses, such as, once this mission is over, we'll head north, or once we find enough supplies of MacGuffins, we'll head north. The reality is it seems it is mainly that Deacon himself doesn't really want to go anywhere. He is just aimless and lost in this world. And his deepest sense of loss is what happened to his wife, Sarah. In the world before, Sarah was a biochemist focused on botany and the study of all sorts of plants, and worked for the government. She met Deacon when he came to assist her with her broken down car while she was a PhD grad student seeking new plants to study in the Oregon wilderness, and the two quickly fell in love. This unusual pairing of woman of science, an outlaw biker with loose ties to a biker gang, part owner of a repair shop, and former army specialist, which will come into play later. But as the characters reference it in-game when the shit went down, meaning the collapse of society because of the freaks, Sarah was badly wounded by a frightened child with a knife, and Deacon and Boozer loaded her onto a Nero helicopter, Nero being our Department of Homeland Security analog for Days Gone, so she can be tended to by actual doctors before she dies. In the days afterward, Deacon tries to find his wife, but it would seem the medical evacuation camp she was supposed to be at was overrun by flesh-eating freaks, and everyone died, including Sarah. So Deacon built a memorial to her once the freaks moved on, and he routinely turns to it to mourn. But we start our game with Deacon and Boozer hunting down a man who escaped one of the camps and took medical supplies that may have killed people in the camp. And this is where we learn our first gameplay tools: healing, shooting, stealth, and tracking. We also start to learn that Deacon has a massive attitude problem and cannot interact with anyone without saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. But then again, the people he interacts with the most are not nice people. As it is heavily implied, the people who had the best chance of surviving the collapse of society were ex-cons, survivalists, ex-military, and generally anyone who was willing to kill their neighbor without a second thought and gut their grandma for giggles. You know, typical zombie survival game tropes. But while trying to do another one of their heading north runs, Deacon and Boozer run afoul of the Rippers, a group of shaven-head self-mutilators who worship the freaks and seek to emulate them, mostly by carving themselves up, especially cutting RIP into everything, who burn Boozer's arm so bad he has become feverish and septic. From this point, the plot of Days Gone goes from doing jobs to get Boozer help, and along the way discovering that Nero is still around and investigating the nests of freaks, which they think are evolving rapidly. During one of these missions, Deacon sneaks up to and corners a Nero agent named O'Brien, the same O'Brien that he handed Sarah over to 2 years prior. So if he survived, certainly Sarah must have, so Deacon thinks. It is admirable that Deacon genuinely loved his wife, and she was his rock. But dude, it's been 2 years and most everyone died. Even other characters try to point this out to him, but Deacon, being the good loyal boy he is, doesn't want to hear it. Things progress, and I won't be going beat by beat here as Days Gone is a very long game. But Boozer has to lose his burned arm to survive. Deacon gets torched by the Ripper leader, who was a former biker brother of his motorcycle club who was tossed out after a serious crime, and Deacon kills him. The two use Deacon's army skills to blow a dam and flood the Ripper camp and kill everyone else. We learn that Nero is in fact studying the evolution of the freaks and has no interest in coming to the help of all these surviving stranded citizens, as their survival no longer aligns with the needs of the remaining government. And O'Brien learns that Sarah may have in fact survived because she had government clearances and was moved to a more fortified camp. Deacon is also at odds for various reasons with the camps he helps. Copeland, because Cope is a creepy survivalist who runs a conspiracy theory radio show and who let his people strip down Deacon's original bike for parts. Tucker's camp, run by an older woman who was a former prison guard and is really, really into slavery. And Iron Mike's camp, because for all of his toughness, Iron Mike is level-headed, sensible, and trying to stay peaceful with his neighbors, even the Rippers. It is Iron Mike's camp where we spend the most time, as that is where Boozer ends up because of his failing health. And it is from this camp that Deacon launches into the second half of the game, going over the mountain to find his wife. Deacon ends up in this latter half of the game running into a large camp of malicious survivalists run by a Colonel Garrett, who we quickly learn is a religious fanatic and sees the downfall of society as God's wrath for allowing things like perversion and criminal mentality to permeate American society. I'll let you decide for yourself what those things mean, dear listener. But it is in this new camp Deacon finds Sarah, alive and well, and working to develop a cure or antidote for the freaks. As Deacon did have army training, he is able to blend in with the camp life and ends up running errands for the colonel while trying to reconcile with Sarah, who is as surprised to see Deacon alive as he is of her. From here, we learn a few final key things, so spoilers ahead. We learned that in the months before the thing that caused the freaks happened, the US government was working on some sort of pathogen for military purposes, and all the weird late-night calls Sarah was getting that we see in flashbacks Deacon has with her were her bosses calling her to do more research. And guess what? That military pathogen was our zombie virus, distilled from natural plant sources, and Sarah had inadvertently been working to doom humanity. We also learned Garrett sees the surviving human camps as more dangerous than the freaks, and he has declared literal holy war upon anyone not in his militia group, and their first target is Iron Mike's camp. It is then a race to the end as Deacon must betray the military camp, rescue his wife, and save Mike's camp. And when I say race, I mean whenever you, the player, feels like getting to it, as this is still a massive map full of side objectives and long distances between objectives that require managing the resources like gasoline, unless you mercilessly abuse the fast travel system like I did. But yeah, a lot of shit goes down, major characters die, Deacon gets captured, and it is Sarah and her knowledge of botany that ends up killing the crazed Colonel Garrett. And Deacon gets to make a few big life and society affirming speeches before the credits roll. But don't turn off the game just yet. There are several missions after the end of the game which tie up some loose ends with either major characters we meet along the way. One is a very critical one if you complete all the Nero missions and are willing to spend a few more hours milling around the game world after you complete the game. And I literally mean a few hours, as it took me a long time to trigger this one. You'll get one final call to O'Brien to meet in an area where you started in the beginning of the game, as O'Brien is a member of Nero who is in rebellion with the government, and you'll soon see why. When Deacon shows up, O'Brien, who has been wearing a hazmat mask this whole game, pulls it off and reveals who he is, a freak, but an evolved, intelligent one, who remembers who he was before he was infected, and who has to go on the run from the government, who is now seeking to kill his new people, the evolving new humanity. He warns Deacon that Nero is coming, and there is nothing he can do to stop them, before hopping back into a black chopper and fleeing. And that was the player being sequel baited at the end. Alright, here we go. Days Gone is a massive game, like way bigger than it should be, with a lot to do, but a lot of it does repeat. It is also a long game, so be prepared for 60 plus hours of open world crafting, sneaking, cutting down not quite zombies and zombie animals, scavenging from cars, hotels, cabins, homes, fire stations, just about anywhere you can to get junk and get gas from, and dealing poorly with other people. There will be historical markers to read, plans to gather as you use whatever Sarah taught you to your advantage, raider outposts to destroy, and of course, hordes of freaks to escape from. Or, if you are late in the game, devastate with moonshine, jug, napalm, and many, many well placed IEDs, and lots of Monty Python and the Holy Grail style running away from the non burning remains of the horde. Unfortunately, not stylish or cool as most action games would want to make it, or make the player out to be, but probably a hell of a lot more realistic. I will say, though, that Deacon is well acted, but kind of an indecisive guy. Someone better at taking orders than giving them, but forced into a position where he now has to lead. The team executed the game was much smaller than one would have expected, only about 50 people, and a lot had to be shaved off and gotten rid of. But they also felt the world of Central Oregon was diverse enough between deserts and snow-capped mountains to keep the players intrigued. I will say this. Central Oregon reminded me a lot of the parts of Pennsylvania I grew up in. A fuckload of nothing but occasional tiny outposts of humanity, except we had more trees. Then again, I've seen a lot of American landscapes over the years and on several cross-country drives, and that could describe most anywhere that isn't one of America's only 3 cities. Days Gone was not very well received upon its debut, getting at best average reviews from critics, mostly for being uninspired and having a lack of content, which compared to most open world fucking shitathons where you have to collect flags or feathers or graffiti dicks or what have you, and people think this is meaningful content, well then fuck you, I guess. It doesn't help that the game requires a 40 gig update patch on its initial startup to fix issues within the game. Critics also thought the world was bland with no standout markers. The characters were bland, and possibly the biggest sin of all, so the critics thought, that Days Gone wasn't The Last of Us. I'm gonna let that fucking phrase sink in, folks. Some thick as pig shit motherfucker who gets to write about games for a living, mind you, when comparing it to another Sony first party title, said it just didn't have the same impact and wasn't as good as another zombie title, despite having all the same shit. Okay, I get nothing. There's nothing to say regarding the depths of that rank fucking stupidity. I will say this, though. I like Days Gone way more. As far as sales, well, here's where we have a fight on our hands. Supposedly, the game sold either 5 or 8 million copies, but was a disappointment by Sony standards, which are usually lower than a snake's belly to begin with. But so are Microsoft's, so fuck you if you think there's favoritism here. When appearing on a podcast with Dave Jaffe, the guy who used to do God of War, director John Garvin of Days Gone said to the public that if fans wanted to see a sequel to the game, then they needed to go out and buy it at full price. Jaffe, who was head of SIE Worldwide Studios at the time, said Days Gone did receive full support, but as soon as a few key figures at SIE left, the franchise was dead in the water, and that every proposed sequel was either outright shot down or buried as soon as it was brought up. So here's another game that won't be getting its alluded to sequel. Wow. There have been a few games I've talked about on the show that were financial disappointments that ended up being franchise killers. Strange. It's almost like the men in charge are only interested in the biggest financial return of all time possible. How funny! It also sounds like there were a lot of behind the scenes dick swinging contests by a bunch of little Napoleons at Sony that helped sink this boat. Also, add that to the strike list against The Last of Us, if you didn't listen to my review of that clown show Misery Fest already. Its dipshit premise was considered better than Days Gone dipshit premise. Somehow. Anyway, so here we are at my view section of the show. I'm not going to lie. At first, I kinda hated this game. but more for the fact that it felt aimless and the characters were meandering, like somebody took the movie Clerks seriously and added zombies. But then I played it more, and I saw Deacon evolve from thug to someone with a purpose, or at least an actual goal that wasn't the typical video game kill 'em all and let RNGesus sort 'em out sort of goal. He was becoming something better than who he was in the world before, even though he still felt he needed to fly his old world colors that no longer meant anything. Yeah, I'm not hot on a lot of the NPCs, most of them are shitty. But then again, I'd expect nothing less in a dog-eat-dog survival scenario. World's gone to hell. What do things like law and order, or even basic civility, mean anymore? Weren't they just structures in place for mutual defense and to keep us from being who we are for the greater good? What even is that now? The world is gorgeous and looks real, something most games don't achieve. It looks exactly like I would expect, with no bullshit fantasy trappings or rallying points to speak to the American patriot, like the White House being blown up or the Statue of Liberty falling over. Nothing to play to that part of it. This Oregon is just a natural world where humans have no place anymore and never did. It's just oddly peaceful, finally. A place where you can be somebody new, since who you were before doesn't matter. Try to make a go of it. Or, if you feel the time is right and there's nothing more, someplace you can quietly end your own days and just let nature heal and have its own way. Days Gone is that rare game for me where I can say that my opinion of it changed for the better the more I went along with it. And believe me, there's a lot of along to go with, as much as the game's gentle pace takes. Not purposeless, just slow. It's honestly a good game. It's just a shame everything that could have gone wrong that had nothing to do with the actual game itself or gameplay went wrong for it. But I do say it is a good game, knowing that there is one where, and I'm not joking here, it gets good 3 to 4 hours in, which is the death knell for most players who expect and demand fireworks and a hand job right away from the digital toys, instead of having a good getting to know you period. I wish the game had gotten more love in the time when it would have counted, not just in an indie podcast review 4 years after its release date. I also wish it hadn't been compared to other Sony darlings with financial figures and pie charts, usually read and gushed over by people who understand neither. But again, wish in one hand and shit in the other and see which fills up first, as they say. But I do have this game as a solid recommend, and pick it up where you can. The story is interwoven and engaging, which I think is good and is critical to storytelling, but critics don't like because, like toddlers, they need simple and clearly defined beginnings and ends. The world is pretty, the character models look like real life people, and just driving around on a motorcycle can be fun. But play it for yourself. And while you do, ask yourself this. If I were in Deacon's shoes, where the world had gone to shit, and I had to figure it out now that there was nothing but me and the wide open road, what would I do? What would you do? Would you fall back into the old ways like some of the camp survivors? Would you fall into madness like the Colonel? Would you just find your own way to head north, like Boozer suggests, and get away from it all? Or would you find new purpose in what was lost? The answer might surprise you. I hope that answer brings you peace with who you are now. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, and Masked Llama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.